So I just want to welcome you all to this open forum. This is an important issue. I think it ties up a few loose ends. You know that we have been charged with fully implementing outcome-based education in Lingnan by the QAC. And it's a pleasing sort of development to see that all the syllabuses, the course outlines that I've seen recently have now got rubrics, and that's a big thing from the QAC point of view. That was one of the things they were talking about. We need to have rubrics because we're moving away from norm reference grading to criterion reference grading using rubrics. Now, one thing that is perhaps a challenge is how do you convert the rubrics, the grading on the rubrics, to, let's say, letter grades, GPAs, or what have you. That's the side of the equation that we really haven't addressed. And I haven't got any sort of, let's say, magic formula, but I'm drawing on the experience of tried and tested faculty who have got various views on how to do this, good ones in my view. And I think that we're not suggesting that one size fits all, but we are saying that these are good ideas. You may want to borrow them, or you may want to sort of just take them as they are, adapt them, or what have you. But it does actually answer the question of from the rubric to the letter grade or the GPA or what have you. And I'm sure these guys, when they talk about their approach, I'm sure you will be able to approach them later if you are interested in how they do it, just to get more information. I don't want to talk anymore. I want to now hand it over to Paul, who will talk about his system of actually transferring the grading in the rubrics to actual final assessments of the students. So over to you, Paul.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. I'm going to give you the magic formula that you were talking about. Not quite. Basically, you know, a group of us teachers were sitting around and we worked on a project called the Total Teacher Project that you may be familiar with. And the people who were involved with that project, we sat around after the project had been concluded and just talked about teaching related issues. And one of the major issues that we saw the university facing was this switch, as we all know, to criteria-based marking this coming year, and how that would impact us as teachers in terms of giving out grades to our students. We had been through a number of changes, and we'd been through all of the OBA stuff, and we had developed our own rubrics. As Jim says, you know, now every course at the university has its rubrics, but we were at somewhat of a loss as to how we would translate the rubrics that we had into grades in terms of letter grades for the students at the end of the day. How do we make this transition from a number-based system to a letter grade-based system which reflects to the students their actual levels of performance and lets them know to what extent they have achieved the criteria and what they need to do in order to get a final letter grade at the end of the semester. Yeah? So if I can just go back to what we used to do, well, even before the rubrics days, the good old days, as some people call them, before that, we used to just give students a number grade. We told them that your essay got 7 out of 10, or 5 out of 10, or 9 out of 10. We might write a few comments at the bottom, but the students wouldn't necessarily know exactly how they did. They, typically would ask us, well, what was the average score? Yeah? And we might give them that average, but that would be the only kind of guidance that they had as to how they were doing. Yeah? Did I do above average? Did I do below average? But they wouldn't have a clue, really, whether the score above average was how far it was above average or how far it would lead them, or whether they would end up with an A or a B or a B minus if the average grade was going to be a C plus. They just wouldn't know. Yeah? So there was obvious limitations with that old system. And then we moved, as Jim said, to the rubric days. And I just want to pass out a couple of things. I don't have it on slide, but I do have the kind of rubrics that are now kind of widely used. This is the kind of standard format, I suppose, at least within the business faculty, because we perhaps did it before some of the other faculties because of AACSB requirements. There's probably not one for everybody. I didn't expect this massive turnout. No, I've never seen this kind of. So these were the old-fashioned, or the existing, if you like, rubrics that we use. This is for one of our courses, Global Business Environment. The actual wording perhaps had changed a little bit since I initially did this, but this blah, blah, blah. That's the kind of detailed, in-depth feedback that students, deserve. I hope most of you can see one of them. Sorry, that's all the copies I have. Could you pass maybe that back, Frankie, and share with? Yeah, if you don't mind. I can give you your own later if you so wish. And anyway, what you see with those rubrics was basically we now told the students what the expectations were in terms of the traits and criteria. And we had our 3 levels, good, satisfactory, poor, or whatever other terminology we used there. And students at least would get something better back. In terms of feedback, but at the end of the day, again, they still ended up with a number which may not have reflected much to them. Yeah? So we did, give them a score out of 20 for trait 1, multiplied it by the weighting of that particular trait, and then give them a score. But again, that score perhaps didn't tell them a lot. Yeah? I mean, they could kind of see, well, it looks like I'm more on this side than that side. I seem to be doing okay. But again, they had to compare the scores that they had with the teammates, the other students in the section or whatever. And again, they wouldn't necessarily be very clear about what kind of performance they were attaining relative to those classmates. Yeah? Another problem, as you know, with the norm-based system is when we did give them these rubrics and when we did tell them, look, you've done this well and this well and this well and this well, and everything is great, when we came down to giving them their final grades, because of the norm referencing system, we would be telling them that you've done everything well, but still you ended up with a B minus. Yeah? And they would say, well, how come all through the year you said I did this, 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 and this, and now I end up with a B minus? That's surely not fair. Yeah? So the principle, I think, with criteria-based referencing is that we get rid of that unfairness in their eyes, and that if they achieve the criteria as set out, and if they do well in the criteria, if they're in that first column, then their grade will reflect that performance, irrespective of the performance of others in the same section. Everybody potentially can get an A, everybody potentially can get a C. Yeah? So that brings us back to the question then of how do we convert what we have there, which pretty much, I know every business course has something very similar to what we have there. How do we convert that into a better system which allows students to have a better handle on how they're doing, that can let them know their performance in each element of the course in terms of the assessment tasks, and can let them know what they still need to gain in order to get the grade that they wish to have. So, as Jim says, we're going to see 3 different approaches today, and perhaps none of them are perfect. I know mine certainly isn't perfect, but I'm going to show you my idea, my plan of how I'm going to proceed, unless, somebody can tell me a better way. So the idea that I have is to basically provide students, and again, if you could share these out a little bit just to give you an idea, what I want to do is to be able to provide students with a kind of ongoing GPA, a kind of cumulative course GPA. Yeah? So students, of course, are very familiar with the GPA system, and they're very familiar with the concept of having a cumulative GPA. They're all aware of their own cumulative GPA, but the cumulative GPA basically works for the program as a whole. Yeah? So what I'm suggesting in my own courses is that I would like to institute this course cumulative GPA. Yeah? So students will be given a letter grade equal to their performance on each assessment task, and then as we go through the course, the cumulative GPA adjusts in line with the different tasks that they have already undertaken. Yeah? So we'll be able to give them, for their first task, an individual essay, give them a grade with a cumulative GPA, which is going to be the same because that's the first task that they've undertaken. Excuse me. Shouldn't have had that sandwich, Jim. Then, as they go on and take the next assessment tasks, the cumulative GPA adjusts on the basis of the weighted tasks that they have already undertaken. Yeah? So this allows them to see how they're doing. It gives them a clear, convincing case of where they're going to end up after all of the assessment tasks have been completed. And, ideally, they'll be able to conduct what-if analysis that will be able to tell them, if I get a in the final exam, this is the kind of grade that I can expect. Yeah? If my final report gets a grade B, well, putting it into this equation based on the figures that I already have, this is what I should get at the end of the course. Yeah? So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm trying to put in place so that students are aware as they go through my course of exactly how they're doing. They know exactly their own performance in terms of meeting each of the criteria, and there's no confusion for them. And it doesn't really depend upon how other people have done. Yeah? It's not influenced by how other people have done. It's just, are you, as a student, meeting the criteria that have been set? Yeah? So for each task, then, we want to end up with a letter grade that we can give them. And these letter grades, they're just more meaningful than numbers to the students. Yeah? Instead of telling them you got 7 out of 10 for the essay, you got 35 out of 50 for the group project, you got A minus for this, to them that's all confusion, and it just doesn't mean a lot to them. They can kind of say, well, I think I'm doing okay. I think I'm doing better than somebody else. But, to them, it's a state of complete confusion. Whereas if they're able to access this cumulative GPA, hopefully that should clarify it for them. Yeah? So the question then still comes back to, how do we get this grade for each assessment task? How do we go from the rubrics that we have, which end up with a number, and how do we convert that into a letter grade? Yeah? Well, my suggestion is kind of let's get rid of the numbers altogether. Yeah? Because different teachers have different kinds of number standards when they think about an A. You know, to me, having been educated primarily in the British system, an A means 75 plus, above 75. To me, a B is 60 to 75. A C, 40 to 60. You know, that's kind of the impression that I have, and I know that differs markedly from my American colleagues who get an A for everything, who get an A just for showing up and whatever. And, you know, so let's get rid of those numbers altogether, yeah, and avoid this confusion. The problem is that when they're told from me they get a 70, you know, and they're told from someone else they got a 70, but we have completely different viewpoints of what that 70 is, no wonder the students end up confused, yeah? So the means by which I suggest in my course that I am going to move from providing the existing rubric, which ends up with a number, which has limited meaning, and towards a letter grade, which hopefully has a better meaning for students, is to just convert the existing rubrics in this manner. Again, if I can pass it around, ask you guys if you would. And again, I realize this is probably not an ideal approach, but I like it because I think it's a possible approach, because in business at least, we have just asked people to prepare these 3-level rubrics. And if we suddenly start saying to them now, oh, those don't work, you need something completely new, completely different, you know, our teaching staff are going to have a revolution. You know, they're not going to accept it. So instead of requiring them to do that, what I'm suggesting is that we, sorry I didn't bring enough copies. I really didn't expect, you know, anybody more than me and Jim to be here. You know? But hopefully you can see or look on to someone. And what you see basically is, instead of now giving a number grade, we give, you know, for the first category, the good category, it now stretches from A minus, B plus, that's good, and then somewhere in the middle runs from B to C, and then the poor category runs from C minus down. Yeah? And again, you know, I just kind of arbitrarily decided on this split, that this column goes as far down as a B plus, but it needn't necessarily be that way for everybody. Now, I think it would be nice if we could, at least within departments or within a faculty, kind of agree on what constitutes a split here. But I mean, this is just for me right now. Other people could change it and rearrange this as necessary, yeah? But basically what happens then, you know, once we mark the paper, we get rid of the idea of numbers, and we say, how well have you met this particular criteria? Yeah? So we look through it and we say, have you met the criteria at a standard, in which case we circle the A, or an A minus standard, or a C plus standard, or a C minus standard. Yeah? And we look at each of the criteria and give students feedback in terms of a letter grade, the extent to which they've met each of these criteria. Yeah? And then, you know, again, the advantage of this is that it works with existing rubrics that we already have. We don't need to really create anything new in terms of rubrics. It's just a slightly different way of coming up with a calculation. Yeah? And then we once we have assigned a letter grade, if we assign an A, we then have the numeric equivalent of A, which is 4, and we multiply it by the weighting, yeah? And then we add up all of those weightings, all of those weighted scores, and we end up with a single score somewhere between 0 and 4, which we then convert back using the university existing grading system. Yeah? Now, I have tried this in the past semester with 2 sections of students, and they were fine with it. Yeah? Even when they came in just a little bit beneath what would have given them an A minus, and instead they ended up with a B plus. You know, they ended up with a very small number underneath. They accepted it, yeah? And actually I think they quite liked it because, you know, they could see why they got the grade that they got, yeah? They could see exactly how they did on each of the various criteria, and they could see overall, explain to them why the letter grade for this particular assessment task had been given to them. Yeah, they didn't have to compare with other people. You know, they could see for themselves exactly how they did. Yeah. So that's one way of doing it, and that's how I plan to do it, unless I hear something much better from my colleagues. Just to finish off, though, this system works great for individual assignments, for group projects, even for participation and stuff. It doesn't work so well for exams. Yeah? And I know Mark Hampton has already done some stuff on exams, but within our own department, we're still really conflicted about how we do this with exams. So I'd like to pass the final piece of paper to you, and it shows 2 kind of methodologies that we're presently using in order to grade exams while making use of rubrics. Yeah? Just give a minute. These are 2 methodologies, neither of which I think is perfect, but I'm hoping that today somebody in this forum, it is intended to be a forum, will be able to give a better viewpoint. So again, if I can steal it back, Frankie. Sorry, Frankie, giving it and taking it away. You know, that's. You know, on this side, this is an example from one of our courses where you do have 5 traits. You know, my question with this, though, I think it's very nicely written and it looks great, but you know, how do you apply it? Now, we're all sitting there with a big stack of exams up to here. You know, do we apply this for every question or every part of every question? Or do we kind of mark the exam and then say, well, overall, they were here, 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 here? You know, I'm not sure how that is meant to be applied. Yeah? So my own approach right now is something much more basic, which, you know, again, I recognize isn't perfect, but my own approach is, you know, basically mark it as I've always marked it, and then say, you know, well, those ones were really good, those ones were so-so, and you know, I don't think that's brilliant either, yeah? So if anybody has any advice about applying rubrics to, without doing all of this for every part of every question, which I'm not going to do, no, to be honest. I'm very hopeful that I'll hear something today. Thank you so much for your time. I'll pass it to my.
Thank you.